Welcome to our lecture series on sports psychology. This is lecture 5, specific preparation skills with a focus on self-talk. So what is self-talk? Self-talk is defined as talking to yourself quietly or out loud to direct events in an inherent or strategic manner. This is quite simply talking to yourself. It's your inner voice and everything that goes along with it. Now, why do we use self-talk? It's to organize one's thoughts. We do this via verbal dialogue, where we talk to ourselves in many cases as if we're another person or from another point of view. It helps us to dissect different areas of our life or different situations to look at them from as many points of view as possible and set our thoughts in order so that we can come to a correct conclusion. It allows us to provide direction and focus. And this goes along with organizing your thoughts and gives you a sense of self-instruction. So once your thoughts are organized, you can give yourself a focus and understand how to move forward and how to actually improve at whatever you're trying to get better at. This then moves you into improved motivation and arousal. So reinforcement. It will help you to continue to do things that you might be doing well at or to fix things that you're not doing well at. It can give you more motivation to try harder, put forth more effort, or to simply do better. And final reason that we do this is to trigger behavior. We use this in a form of routine building, and we'll discuss this a little bit later on in our lecture series as far as using different keywords to psych ourselves up or to initiate a given behavior in a closed chain loop. Everyone talks to themselves at some point. But when using directed self-talk as an actual technique to help our psychological performance, there's a distinct difference when looking at beginners versus advanced individuals in this. Beginners typically use their self-talk in a very instructional and motivational manner. They seek to be helpful to the given situation to provide either that motivational kick that they need moving forward or to provide some sort of direction on what they need to do. And in many cases, this is very reactionary. It's unplanned and unsure. They're executing something without thinking about it, and then when something goes wrong, they try to coach themselves through that given situation. The difference here is an advanced individual, their self-talk is highly planned and very methodical. It is typically a practiced, almost routine-like form of self-talk that is very strategic, where they're reminding themselves of things that they know about already. It is very adaptable and less reactionary. In many cases, they don't require the same motivation of, I need to do a better job. They've learned to strategically analyze the situation and provide different conclusions in an objective manner. Now, becoming advanced takes practice and experience to where you need to integrate different techniques together. And we'll talk about those techniques now. First of the self-talk techniques is probably the most basic one and the one we typically start with. It's called thought stopping. Now, thought stopping is very simple in nature. It's where we stop a negative or damaging thought consciously. We need to consciously identify that we're thinking of something very negative, and then in many cases, we audibly say, stop. So if you're thinking, man, I'm really sucking at this, I'm missing all of this, stop. And then you need to shift focus, create distance between you and that thought. That way you can allow yourself to objectively look at that situation, look at what the thought was caused by, and give you different inspiration on how to move forward rather than focusing on that thought and letting it snowball into further worse negative thoughts. Now, this is the first self-talk technique, is teaching you how to stop. Next, we're going to teach you how to replace. In thought replacement, we use a similar technique as in thought stop, but we take that one negative thought and replace it with a positive thought or something more constructive. So in many cases, flipping negatives into positives. An example would be, we have a lifter that's thinking, don't choke on this lift, don't choke on this lift. They're actually in a negative tone telling themselves to choke on this lift because they're so afraid that they're paralyzing themselves with this negative self-talk. Instead, we replace this with stay tight and put everything into this lift. You got it. It's motivational, it's instructional, and it's positive. And that's really what we want to look at here. And then we can make the lift. Countering is a technique that's somewhat similar to thought replacement, but here we're using reason to counter different thoughts and turn them into something helpful or positive. So again, disproving the negative, but using reason in place of just putting a positive thought in play. So here an example would be in wrestling. I don't know if I can beat them. They are bigger and stronger than me. A counter argument would be quick and focus on technique. You have drilled takedowns against bigger opponents before. You got this. Now, the important thing to look at with this example is that this individual has actually trained this before, and they know that if they're quick and focus on their technique, that it can overcome strength. So they are countering that initial objection of they're bigger and stronger than me with the way that you can actually beat that bigger and stronger. So it's using a countering technique in this case. Another example is reframing. This is another technique. Here we look at the situation from a different point of view to solve the problem. Now this is usually tactical and sometimes technical. An example of this from a reframing strategy could be if you're consistently looking at the offensive problem from an offensive point of view, you might miss the side that the defense sees. So if you actually look at things from the defensive side, you could see all the ways that they can stop you and find where they will have trouble and take advantage of that. Another example of this from a technical standpoint is maybe when working on the technique for a clean. Here, many times coaches will focus on what to do with the legs and how to push through the legs. Another example of this or a reframing could be let's focus on the back or focus on what your arms will do in order to remove thinking about the legs so much, and by approaching the lift from that new angle, you could solve the problem potentially. Putting some of these simple self-talk techniques into play, we want to talk about the application. Here, we're going to start with doing our best to remove negative thoughts or actions from our self-talk. Negative thoughts do not help us. They hurt us more than anything, but we will still have them. So what we need to do is identify them and then work on replacing the negative statements with positive ones. Start to become a little bit more instructional and more supportive of ourselves in what we do. If we keep missing when we're throwing a pitch and we keep throwing the ball too low, we need to, instead of saying, stop throwing the ball low, stop sucking, think to yourself, throw the ball a little higher, get closer to that box. Try and find a way to actually turn that negative into a positive and become more instructional. You can find cues or different trigger words that direct your actions and motivations in this positive direction. In some cases, it might be stay tight. Maybe you need to go through a routine to actually understand how to perform some sort of given action of where your hand placement is, where your foot placement is. Is your back tight? Do you feel the grip on whatever item that you're grabbing? In this case, you want to try to build a self-talk script to use before different bouts, practices, or scrimmages. It locks you into the performance that you are about to engage in so that you are conscious and aware of what's going on. The recommended time is to try to do no more than 10 to 15 seconds in length of self-talk and keep it short, simple, and direct. Of course, you'll perform self-talk throughout a general sporting event if it happens, but really you want to be very engaged in the moment, analyzing the situation and predicting the movement. This will take time and practice, but as always, you want to make sure that you remain as positive as possible and not let those negative thoughts creep into your head. If they do, simply stop, reframe, refocus, and revamp to move forward. So this is it for the self-talk lecture. In our next lecture, we're going to be on lecture 6 of specific preparation skills, talking about concentration and how it is integrated in the specific preparation skill and then expanded upon later when we look at the competitive setting. Concentration itself is actually going to expand into other areas such as routines, touching back in on self-talk, and looking at imagery as well.